But I would like to introduce Saul first. So Saul is the CEO of retail banking, is that correct?
Whatever you say.
Whatever I say. So he's now promoted to the CEO of retail banking. So it's great to have you here, Saul. Great you can make the time. And I would like to invite you to have the discussion with Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans.
All right, so Saul, we do go back a long time.
We do.
Right? And I do blame you for me being even part of BIAN, to be honest with you. Huh?
That's a lie.
Yeah, well, okay.
It's not me.
But Saul and I go back, I think, over 20 years, to be honest. We have nearly 20 years back at ING, where we both really started to get interested in BIAN, and we're going to talk about that as we go through today. But as Hans mentioned, you're one of those guys that had an amazing career from a technology perspective, right? And have now jumped to the other side of the fence, right? From a business perspective. Yeah. And incredible, right? It's inspirational to see your career and where you've gotten to. But now that you're on the business side of things and you reflect back on what you've learned from a technology perspective, how valuable is that technical understanding and that that aptitude when it comes to your current role on the business side?
That is a great question to start with. Let me start with, first of all, thanks for having me here. Architects are my favorite people on the tech team. And I'm not saying that because the majority of the folks are architects here, but it's true.
Listen, he asked before, he goes, how many architects are in the room? I go, well, there's a lot. He goes, okay, then I'm going to say something.
Then I'm going to say that. So, if it would be the lead developer, I would have said still, architects are my favorite people in the room. I cannot emphasize this enough, and I'm too Dutch not to speak the truth, right? So then we know where we stand with each other. Going back to the question, Steve, what you take from a technology role into a CEO role is deep inspection, really understanding the details. I don't believe that you can lead a large domain by thinking that you can stay on the large, high-level type of approach of things. You need to understand the details before you can say it will be a success. Which assumptions need to be true to make the outcome work is another thing that you need to know. It's definitely an advantage to come with a tech background. You can go faster when you know what is really needed to get things done. Really important. You can translate, because too many tech people, I'm sorry to say it, speak too much tech. And we all think that people understand us. But they don't, really. They think you're coming from Mars or somewhere, but not from planet Earth. So translating between product people and tech people is really an important role. And then last but not least is the right prioritization. I call this the blueberry muffin. People always want to have a blueberry muffin. Have you ever baked a blueberry muffin where you first put a muffin in the oven, and when it's baked, you put in the blueberries afterwards? Because that's sometimes what we do when we create a new product. We say we want to have it fast, and then people from the tech side come in, yeah, but we need to have alerting, monitoring. We need to do something on cybersecurity maybe. We need to think about all the non-functionals. Oh, that can come later. And that's a little bit like a blueberry muffin, where you have the muffin, and then you start to push in the blueberries after the muffin is baked. That doesn't work. So helping with that prioritization is another thing where I can help.
Yeah, very, very cool. All right, so we have our traditional banking, let's say, industry at this particular point in time. I think is on the cusp of a lot of change. Mm-hmm. I think BIAN's going to be part of that, but we'll get to that here in a second. But when you think about the transition that traditional banks need to go, and we've talked a lot about fintechs being something that's going to disrupt the industry, but it's really a matter of kind of customer expectation and what customers are expecting out of banks. And we think about embedded finance. We think about the seamless nature by which retail customers are going to need to consume our services. Just talk a little bit about how you see the traditional banks needing to transform in the way we're providing our services and how they're going to need to change in order to continue to compete.
Yeah, and maybe that's a long question to answer, but we can do it shortly. If we start to think outside in, you start with the customers, right? And we all say that we start with the customers, but truly, how many of the product people that we know start with the customer truly in mind? And when you start with the product person thinking about the customer, you have to start to think about design at the same time. Now, if you start to rank your talent across product and design, and you start to find gaps, then you better close those gaps. That's where it really starts. We all like Amazon and the reorder. Do you want to order it again? It's a one-push order that you can put in place. And because it's so simple, we keep on buying things at Amazon. It's not that they are pushing things to us. No, we buy it. And that's, for me, one of the most important things as a bank to do is to create cross-buy, not cross-sell. Cross-sell is pushing things to you, and we have seen in the past what can happen to banks like Wells Fargo, where I work today. It's about cross-buying, making that experience so easy, so cumberless, so fantastic that you want to have that, like, I call that the McDonald's meal. If you are at the McDonald's and you order your fries, you go back to your table and you say, I want to have nuggets as well. You go back for the McNuggets. And then you get thirsty and then you take the Diet Coke or whatever Coke you drink.
I'm still ordering the Happy Meals.
You're still at the Happy Meals, but can you imagine? That's why they created the meal. Now, as a bank, you can do the same. You can create a checking, savings, and an investment product in one go, clearly disclosed. The calories are there, the price is there, the fees are clear. You can do that as a bank in the same way with a very easy type of process. Now, that's how product design and then tech need to work together to make that a fantastic experience. Now, this is all beautiful words, but for the people who know me and know what we are doing, that's what we are doing at this very point.
Yeah, very cool. Then let's think about BIAN, right? And you, as well as a lot of us, were part of the initial kind of groundworks on the foundation of BIAN. As you've gone from ING and on to JP and then on to Wells. Talk about how maybe BIAN has played a part of the role, and when you've gone into the banks and looked at transforming them, how has BIAN been a part of that process, and how have you used BIAN? And then we'll get into some deeper questions from there.
Yeah. So. I think, so deep in my heart, I am an architect, or deep in my mind. I don't know where it sits, somewhere in between, I guess, between the ratio of things and the intuition that you have around certain things, how it should work. And from the moment on that BIAN came into the sphere of ING, where one of our former colleagues, Age Miedema, it was, you said it, was involved, we were thinking about why does every bank think that they are different? Because when I ask all of you, are you the same as the other bank? You will all say, no, we're different. And we are, to a large extent, really a common place to work with common procedures, common processes, common risks, common controls, common policies, but we tend to think that we're all different. And that's often the death of speed. It's often the death of decision-making at speed. It's often the way we appear in the street as companies that are difficult to deal with, because we all think we are special, and we are not. I have to disappoint all of you if you still think that way. 80 to 90% is common across the banks. It's that design, that smooth type of journey. If you nail that, you are special. You are different. All the rest is the same. Now, when you start thinking from that type of blueprint, then that's why I'm here on this stage. That's why when you invited me to come over here and to share a couple of thoughts, because what you are doing here in this room, what you are doing, Steve, Hans, and everybody that is contributing, is making the case that we are not special, but that we have more in common than we all think. Now, if you look at what we are doing and what we have been doing at JP Morgan Chase and at Wells, is using BIAN as what we call the banking, product, and platform architecture. So when I was still the CIO for Wells Fargo, we claimed the word product and we claimed the word platform. So it isn't a technology architecture by itself. Yes, it has the technology domains, it has the data domains, but it's also an organizational architecture. So we plotted all product domains on 4 levels. Level 4, the product executive, which is a role. Level 3 is the product manager. Level 2 is the product owner. And then level 1 is the Scrum team. That organizational model is applied to everything that we do on the change side of the bank. That's, for us, the way to basically harness everybody in the same model with options and freedom. And of course, we have discussions around the domains, debit, payment domain as an example. We know Steve Hageman is here from Wells. There are always discussions with, can BIAN architecture really fit for all the banks, or are there small little nuances that you need to put in place? If that's the 10% where we are special, I'm okay with that. The second thing that we are doing is when we build APIs, we test them against the BIAN semantic APIs to see are they compliant. And when we add things, we will add things to the BIAN semantic APIs. So we contribute back. And that's basically what we do. And that thinking of it's a product and a platform is really important, because I'm a firm believer that you need to build to consume. So you build something that is ready for consumption by others. And before you build, you start to look for what can I consume. Now, I tell you, in a development community with 40,000 developers, to instill that thinking, you need an architecture and a harness to make sure that nobody is directly building their own stuff without thinking what they can consume first. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, very, very cool. You know, one of the things that we stress, kind of where we're at with regards to BIAN, and we talked about this, Saul, a little bit, is adoption, right? And all the architects in the room sometimes appreciate the fact that sometimes it's difficult to convince the business to take the time and to take the necessary attention to detail to become BIAN compliant, when sometimes it's easier just to do it ourselves, right? Yeah. And to do it uniquely. So now that you're sitting in a chair from a business perspective, you know, what's the advice to all the architects that are out there as we start thinking about adoption? How do we bring this to life for our business partners to convince them that BIAN is really, you know, worth the investment, worth the time and the energy to do it right, and to start like future-proofing our banks rather than continuously, as you say, doing it ourselves and doing it uniquely different. But getting the business to realize that is a difficult challenge, and I think that's what steps in the way of adoption at the level that we need. So, what's advice on how do we get our businesses to realize the true value of what the architects can see every day?
I think there are two main stakeholders that, if you haven't won their hearts yet, you have to start winning their hearts. And the first one is the tech executive, whether that's the CIO, whether that's the development manager of an important domain. But if the tech executive is not behind the architecture, it's a worthless battle, honestly. I don't know how you drag yourself to work every day if the tech team itself is still not believing in what you are preaching, if that's the case. So you need to win the hearts and minds of the tech community of your bank. That alone, it will not do the job enough. You also need to win the hearts and minds of some of the most important thought-leading product executives at your bank. Because if you have one or two people who start to echo what you are saying on the product side, and you have one or two or three tech executives that start to echo what you say and where you believe in, you start to have this Dolby surround impact. Like everybody is saying the same, and there's somewhere a CEO highly nervous, often very uncertain about tech, and when that executive starts to hear 3 times the same, that same CEO, that same executive that wasn't believing in it, starts to believe in it. That's how simple the trick works. Now, you need to ask yourself, are you convincing enough to have that product executive on your side? So how's your story built? How do you message your story? Do you have examples? Do you have leading indicators that things can really be better if you do it in a different way? I leave that all up to you. That's why architects are also highly paid compared to some other people. That's why I like them as well, by the way. Have I said already that I like architects? No, but it's really important that you make.
And now we're going to have a lot of architects asking for increases in pay, I think. So,
I see you're a platinum partner. So.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, and we got my crew right here. Well, so Saul, then let's get into a little bit on the future of BIAN, a little bit, right? And you've seen it evolve from where it started. And there's a lot of buzz, right, about artificial intelligence, generative AI, and we talked about it a little bit, right, with regards to what BIAN could evolve into when we look at the future and the art of the possible of what we could be. And truly, a number of us can see, I believe, the fact that we could change the way the industry operates, right?
Yeah.
And we can break down the barriers that exist today and get into true kind of plug and play kind of ability of interoperability across the industry and really change the way we handle integration and all the things that get in our way of being fast and efficient and delivering services. What would be your kind of view of where you see BIAN going? We talk about creating an open kind of platform for us all to contribute. Is it a reality? Is it just a pipe dream? Or is this something that we need to be more grounded in the reality of what actually could take place?
So I think first, I said, what are the assumptions that need to be true to make this a success? I think there are a couple of assumptions that we should discuss first. Because if I would be a bad actor and looking at the bank industry, and I know there's somewhere an open platform that is allowing for all the banks to basically consume the APIs, that would be my vector to go to. So whatever we do as BIAN, it needs to be secure, secure, and secure. Because we will be the vector for all the bad actors outside. That's a platform type of attack that they love to breach. So that will be one, I guess. The second thing is that 10% and 90% type of discussion. The 90% should be the same. The 10% should be unique or will be unique. What is that 10% that will be unique? Yeah. And then there's nothing, I think, that stands in the way of thinking about generating APIs. If you look at the co-pilot pilots that we are all doing, I guess, in the industry, where we start to see how code can be generated by co-pilots through, in this case, the Microsoft environments. It is a kind of mind-blowing, and it takes away a lot of the common coding that we see today that is every time the same. It's the same spec, coded in the same way, or maybe slightly different way, or completely in the wrong way, and that you will find that out later with an incident. But there's so much that we can generate automatically, and there's nothing, I believe, that should stand in the way of APIs getting generated in that way and getting consumed in that way, assuming it's all safe and secure. Then you come into the next cycle of regenerative AI, because we talk about generative AI today, but if you think about what's the next step, that is regenerative AI, right? AI that starts to regenerate itself because it learns further and further. Now, the same with code. The same with APIs. It's not like a static world. APIs tend to change. So regenerative code generation, if you want to call it like that, yeah, I can see that happening. But the big premise is it needs to be safe, and we need to agree that 90% is the same.
Yeah, very, very good. So you think about the advancement of BIAN, and maybe you would say the winners or the losers, and as we level the playing field with something like a common framework like BIAN, and you think about the vendors that are in the room and the integrators that are in the room, right? This could be a bit of a threat. So what would you say to the vendor community, right? When you think about the core banking providers and everything else that are looking at BIAN as a potential threat to what they deliver in value, and why would they participate in BIAN when it could literally kind of threaten the value proposition that they deliver? And so, when we look at changing an industry, there's always going to be, those people that are going to have their own interest in mind, and so, given that they're not all architects in the crowd today, even though you love them the most, there are also, a lot of vendors in the room and integrators in the room and so on, and I give them tremendous credit for being a part of BIAN and seeing how, the world's going to change and how they can be a part of it. Yeah. But what would you say to some of those that are looking at this as a threat than maybe an opportunity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's not the easiest question, because I believe that if we have competitors here in the room that are completely on the same domain, this could be a threat for you. But if I look at how the SaaS community is really starting to differentiate themselves on, we are good in product and pricing. We are strong in transaction ledgers. We are strong in account management. We are strong in sales and promos and offers. And we are strong in financials, and we are strong in HR. I believe that you have default winners in the industry today where no bank is building their own CRM system anymore. We all go to whatever it is, and we don't build our own HR system anymore. We all go to whatever it is. You will see that in this landscape of APIs, there will be a few defined winners that will be part of that API landscape. And it's up to the vendors to be the preferred API provider for that service that is on finance, on CRM, on product, on pricing, on transaction ledgers. We can even be, BIAN can even be the provider of all those services in a kind of marketplace, where it's up to the banks that are part of BIAN to select which one you want to have. Is it Workday or the other one? Is it Salesforce or the other one? That's how I see it. But it all comes down to good old-fashioned competition. Make sure that you are distincting yourself, and 2, compliance to the BIAN architecture and API framework. So the more compliant you are, the bigger the success could be. Yeah.
Very good. All right, I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to open it up maybe to the room for questions that you want to come in. I assume we have mics that we can pass around and everything else. So if we could get ready for that, that would be great. Are we good for that? Okay. The regulatory community, right? One of the things that we all, are deeply involved in is obviously the requirements from a regulatory point of view. And for those organizations that are in so many different countries, and there's so many different requirements and everything else. So, one of the things we've been talking about is how do we approach the regulatory community when it comes to BIAN? And is there a value proposition for the larger banks to use BIAN to get the regulatory community involved as well? Is there an opportunity there for BIAN from your perspective? And you deal a lot, obviously, with the OCC and the regulators in the US and around the world from your previous experience. Is this not an opportunity for the regulatory community to come alongside us as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
It depends. It really depends. So it's the blueberry muffin story, I think. That if we can tell them, like, hey, we have blueberry muffins, the blueberries are already baked into it, meaning with that all the controls that we require from a security perspective, the controls that we require from a change management perspective, the controls that we require from a stability, service management type of perspective. If these are already baked in, there's definitely a story that we could tell to the regulators to say, this API is, let's say, certified with blueberries in the muffin right from the start when it goes into the oven, which is different than there's a sprawl of services out there, because really regulators have no oversight anymore of all the, in the US, 7,000 fintech providers that we have. There's 7,000 out there. They cannot regulate it anymore. They cannot oversee it anymore. And it all comes down to us as banks to make sure that we, across all those fintech players, have a safe and sound type of environment. So I think we can make a case there. I think that's all up to the bright minds of BIAN and to see whether you want to test this. To my own surprise, the regulators around the world have really the same standards. Yeah. Some are more strong on enforcing the standards, but the standards are the same, really. There's maybe 2%, 3% difference across all of the different regulators across Singapore, Japan, Australia, England, or the US. They are really, and the ECB in Germany, of course, in Europe. They're all the same, all the same.
Yeah, wouldn't it be something for a regulator to be able to develop their BIAN compliant, own microservice, right, that they can plug into banks and
or even that, yeah,
would be pretty incredible, right? Really, really cool. All right, so we're going to go to questions in the room. I've got 10 more questions to ask Saul, but it'd be great to get your perspective on things and have any questions that you would like to ask Saul or myself. Anybody brave enough to raise their hand? Yeah, in the back, if you would.
So, Saul and Hans and Steve, how are you working with the smaller banks? So you got the big banks that are able to do this, but the smaller banks are just struggling to say, and they have to go to the Federal Reserve Bank to borrow their money if they have to go to the big four. So how are you pushing out BIAN? How are you pushing out BIAN? I'm not going to sing today.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Maybe later, when I play piano, but right now, I just would like to know how are we, and I want to talk more with Hans about this, how we do this to the smaller banks. How do we get the smaller banks more involved in the whole process? So.
Yeah, so I will start. We're both part of very big banks, Saul. But I think when it comes to buy-in and the overall adoption, I think it's going to start with the big banks, right? Because we're going to have the leverage to be able to push broader adoption and have greater influence in the industry, including the vendor community and the integrator community that's sitting with us. It would be great to see maybe in the U.S. Some of the smaller banks coming together that could come to us in a more of a unified way. But we would hope that the smaller banks are going to be the benefactor of what we're going to be pushing, because it's going to be difficult for them to really get critical mass, I think, to influence the industry in that fashion. But if you think about the true benefactors of ultimately what we will accomplish if the bigger banks continue to push this and demonstrate why we should move the industry in this way, the smaller banks will really be the tremendous benefactor to be able to have kind of plug and play capabilities of things that are developed in other organizations to which they can just bring into their environments in a plug and play way. So I would be interested in everybody else's thoughts as well as we think about this, but from a buy-in strategy point of view, it's been how do we get the momentum going in with the larger banks that ultimately start pushing the industry in this way, and the benefactors are going to be your fintechs, are going to be your smaller banks, right? The benefit from the fact that we have an established standard.
Yeah. I think there's something with, and your accent, coming from the US or not?
Chris Kenny from San Francisco.
San Francisco, there you go. So if you look at the smaller banks in the US, they are called what I call Lego block type of banks. So they have 5-6 components that often a FIS type of company is doing for them. So it's not so much that they need to have their own IT, because often they don't have the pockets to do that. They cannot keep up with attrition, hiring the talent. So they work with what I call the Lego blocks, putting together core banking here, Salesforce there, something else there. And that's their landscape. So I think it's a vendor-based landscape, and that's why it's so important that we have all the vendors here as well, and that we work together to make that compliant, but also go faster, also for the smaller banks.
Because they won't be able to afford, and they don't have the staff that a lot of the larger banks have. So they will need to use the traditional Lego block concept that we talk about in buy-in, right? The ability to plug and play with whatever they want to have. And so, but they'll be that benefactor. I don't think that they can be the driving force. We need to be the driving force. But at some point, we should try to mobilize the smaller banks and to become a part of buy-in and to demonstrate that we have value to deliver for them. So it's a very, very good question.
We have people politely standing there, but there are seats over here. So I would say, come and join us.
Please come sit down.
Yeah.
So very, very good question. And I know that there's some in the room that are representing some of the smaller banks as well. So it'd be great to be part of the discussion this week as to how we can help with the smaller banks as well. Other questions?
Questions over there.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Deepak from Backbase Amsterdam. How much of investment do you think BIAN is making in the enhancing the domain model and APIs towards the channel instead of being largely focused on the inner complexities of the bank? So if you look at the service domain model today, it mirrors the complexity of a bank operates. How much of this is actually going to be end-user centric, channel-facing, with respect to the breadth of operations and the enhancement of the domain model itself?
Mm-hmm. So I seem to be the one who needs to answer that question. Yeah. So
get the mic to...
No, I have my own mic. I'm still mic'd on. So when you look at the latest, the Callers 3 we did, and we will have a session on that later today, that's completely focusing on the customer. So we have the whole front end there was created by Salesforce. And of course, if you want to do open banking, then you need to have the user interface. You need to have the focus on the user interface. So the whole user side is already defined and operational, but then also you need to have the process in the back. So we identified all the bits and pieces, all the Lego blocks that are needed, let's say, to interact with the customers of the bank, if they are corporates or if they are consumers. And we are describing what. So we described all the what and the how. That's something that everybody has to fill in by themselves. So there will be room for improvement if you go the direction Saul and Steve are mentioning, that we are also getting more ready consumable assets available. Then we also need to think about the how, and that's where we need you for. Because you know the how, and we only know the what. So again, thank you for asking the question, and we are looking forward to your input.
Very good. Maybe we have time for one more question, if there's one out there. Sorry.
Yeah, my name is Victor Gaur from TD Bank. I would want to know what would be your advice for a bank for adoption, BIAN adoption. What would be a step 1, step 2? How should a bank progress further in this journey?
Go ahead.
Not knowing your starting point, it's a bit hard to jump in and say this should be the first step. But assuming there is nothing today, like there's nothing, right? How do you start doing this? I would start with collecting a smart architecture team that is in close collaboration with your lead developers. That would be 1, your CTO, whoever. Then 2, I would make sure that you create the mandate for IT to create the architecture for the bank. Creating a mandate goes through the same tech executive that I said earlier, and or a few product executives. There are always, a large bank like TD Bank, you always will have a few product executives who get it, who really understand what you're trying to do, and who will be supportive. Then 3, you need to have a simple message to make the executives understand why it's a win-win for everybody. Now, that simple message, that's key. I don't know how you phrase that at TD Bank, I don't know where you are at this point, but really coming in with a document that is ultimately simple to understand for an executive who doesn't understand architecture, IT, and doesn't want to understand architecture and IT. They just want to have a simple message that they can absorb in 30 seconds, make the quick trade-off, makes sense, makes no sense, and if it's in the basket of makes sense, they will say yes. So your messaging will be key. And then when you have that mandate, then you need to follow through, because it's great to have the mandate, but then all responsibility is back on your shoulders. Now you need to come through with something that is meaningful. Start with the change budget and investment process, the yearly cycle, and start plotting that on the product and platform architecture that BIAN provides. And start to show how much redundant investments are done on the same set of services, and it's only because this side of the bank doesn't know what that side of the bank is doing. And that's why you are here as architects, to show that. And when you can say, we squeeze 20 million out of a budget of 200 million, you are the winner. That's a simple message. And then you can start driving the architecture into the bank. It's not that hard, honestly, but it really will come down to your executive sponsorship and your ability to tell the story. You're welcome.
Well, Saul, thank you. We've ran out of our time, and we need to move on. But thank you so much for, one, your leadership across the industry and your support of BIAN. It really makes a difference. So thank you for joining us today. Let's give...
Allow me to say one thing. I'm only here and in this role and in my roles before because of some of the great bosses that I had. And this is not to please Steve here on stage, but I owe you a lot, Steve. So I want to have a big applause for Steve.